Hi, this is Daniel again. I serve as a spokesperson for Nehemiah Reset. Today I want to talk to you about Ilhan Omar and the Somali community. In recent days, there have been a number of fraud cases involving the Somali community in Minneapolis. However, the problem of illegal work occurring in the Somali community has come up several times in the last 5 years. For example, in the 2020 election cycle, there were allegations surrounding Representative Ilhan Omar and a purported pay-to-vote operation targeting the Somali community in Minneapolis. Originating from a series of videos published by the conservative activist group Project Veritas in late September 2020, the scheme was described as a sophisticated and illegal ballot harvesting effort where money was exchanged for votes, with the ultimate goal of securing electoral victories for Omar and her preferred candidates. This video will delve into the intricate details of these allegations, examine the specific elections they were said to have influenced, analyze the purported impact on voting totals, and explore the severe legal ramifications that could ensue if such a scheme were proven to have been directed by a sitting member of the United States Congress. We will also look briefly at the current fraud allegations occurring in the Somali community. What was the genesis of these allegations and the Project Veritas and the Cash for Ballots video? The controversy erupted on September 27, 2020, when Project Veritas, an organization known for its undercover sting operations and frequently criticized for deceptive editing practices, released a video titled Ilhan Omar Connected Ballot Harvester and Cash for Ballots Scheme. Car is full of absentee ballots. The video's premise, as announced dramatically by its founder James O'Keefe, was that sources inside the Somali community here in Minneapolis allege that the architect of this pay-per-vote scheme is none other than U.S. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. The central claim was that Omar's campaign apparatus was orchestrating an illegal operation to collect absentee ballots, particularly from vulnerable or elderly members of the Somali American community, in exchange for cash payments. The primary evidence presented in the video consisted of secretly recorded conversations and clips from social media. A key figure featured was a Minneapolis man named Libin Mohammed, who posted Snapchat videos showing himself with stacks of absentee ballots. In one clip, he is heard saying, "Money is the king in this world," while in another, he displays what he claims are filled-in ballots, stating, "Just today we got 300 for Jamal Osman." Notably, Mohammed's own words directly reference Jamal Osman, a candidate for Minneapolis City Council in Ward 6, who won a special election on August 8, 2020. He did not, however, mention Ilhan Omar in his original social media posts. Project Veritas's narrative was built upon connecting the dots from Osman's victory to Omar's broader political influence within the community. Another source in the video was an anonymous former Minneapolis political worker who alleged that Omar's campaign deputy district director, Ali Issigani, was specifically coordinating the collection of ballots from elderly residents at Charles Horn Towers, a housing complex in the city, in the lead-up to the Minnesota primary on August 8th. This allegation aimed to establish a direct link between the alleged ballot harvesting and Omar's official campaign staff. A third source, Omar Jamal, who was identified as working with the Ramsey County Sheriff Department and as chairman of the Somali watchdog group, claimed to be the brother of newly elected Councilman Jamal Osman. Jamal provided the most explosive accusations, asserting that the operation was widespread and that Omar herself was the mastermind. He claimed, "It's an open secret and that Omar will do anything that she can do to get elected, and she has hundreds of people on the streets doing that." Jamal also alleged that many of the individuals whose votes were harvested may not have been American citizens, a claim that, if true, would elevate the severity of the alleged crimes to a new level. The allegations were not confined to a single election, but were portrayed as a systemic tactic employed across multiple contests to consolidate power within Minneapolis's Somali community and benefit Omar's political allies. The primary elections discussed in the Project Veritas expose took place on August 4, 2020, a date that held significance for both Ilhan Omar and Jamal Osman. Ilhan Omar faced a contentious primary challenge for her seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. While she ultimately won her primary, the Project Veritas video suggested her victory margin was artificially inflated by the illegal ballot harvesting scheme. The operation, according to the accusers, was designed to ensure she not only won, but did so decisively, reinforcing her status as the unchallenged political leader of the community. Simultaneously, the August 4th primary included a special election for the Minneapolis City Council seat in Ward 6 to replace the retiring Abdi Warsame. The race featured a slate of Somali-American candidates, with Jamal Osman emerging as the winner. The video from Libin Mohammed explicitly stated, "Just today we got 300 for Jamal Osman," directly tying the alleged ballot harvesting effort to Osman's campaign. The implication was that the same network that benefited Omar was mobilized to secure Osman's victory, effectively installing a political ally into a key local office. As one report described it, these corrupt and illegal ballot harvesting operations not only elevated Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat Minnesota, into office, but also helped secure spots for local city officials. Beyond these specific races, the allegations were quickly co-opted and amplified to cast doubt on the integrity of the entire 2020 general election, particularly the presidential contest in Minnesota. The video's release in late September, just weeks before the November vote, was strategically timed. President Donald J. Trump repeatedly shared references to the video on Twitter and during a rally in Duluth, Minnesota, on September 30th, 2020. Pages like DC Drano posted excerpts with captions like, "Ilhan Omar operatives caught paying to create fake ballots." The narrative became a cornerstone of the then president's broader, unsubstantiated claims of widespread voter fraud, suggesting that if such a scheme could exist in Omar's district, it could exist anywhere, potentially tipping the scales of a presidential election. Quantifying the precise impact of the alleged scheme on voting totals is challenging, as the claims themselves remain unproven. However, the accusers painted a picture of an operation large enough to be decisive. Libin Mohammed's claim of having collected 300 for Jamal Osman on a single day suggests a high-volume operation. In a low-turnout special primary election for a city council seat, a few hundred illegally harvested ballots could easily be the difference between victory and defeat. Jamal Osman won the Ward 6 special election with 2,901 votes, defeating his nearest competitor by a significant margin. While he was a frontrunner, the allegations imply his victory was not entirely organic, but was engineered through an illegal cash-for-ballot system. The Project Veritas report described voting operations in parts of the Somali community that resemble the warlord-led clans of their native country more than American democracy, suggesting a system of political control enforced through coercion and bribery rather than democratic persuasion. For Ilhan Omar's primary race, the impact is less clear-cut on a numerical basis. She won her primary with a comfortable plurality, receiving 48.5% of the vote in a three-way race. However, the purpose of the alleged fraud may not have been solely to win, but to project an aura of invincibility and to test and refine a system that could be deployed in the future or for other candidates. The claim that Omar had hundreds of people on the streets doing that implies an operation capable of moving thousands of votes, which would be more than enough to sway a close race or to pad the margins of a less competitive one, creating a deterrent for future challengers. The broader impact on public perception and trust in the electoral system, however, was undeniable. The viral spread of the video and its promotion by the President of the United States injected a potent narrative of corruption into the national conversation. It fueled skepticism about mail-in voting and ballot harvesting at a time when their use was expanding due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This narrative contributed to a climate of doubt that persisted long after the election, even in the absence of corroborating evidence. What are the legal ramifications of this illegal voting operation? If it could be proven in a court of law that Representative Ilhan Omar had her hands in directing the illegal operation described by Project Veritas, the legal consequences would be immediate, severe, and potentially career-ending. The alleged actions touch upon numerous federal and state election laws, each carrying significant penalties, including fines and lengthy prison sentences. What were some of the federal election law violations? At the federal level, the most direct and serious charge would be conspiracy to violate federal election laws. Key statutes that would likely apply include 52 U.S.C. Section 10307E, voter bribery. This statute explicitly makes it a federal crime to knowingly and willfully pay, offer, or accept anything of value in exchange for a vote for any candidate in a federal election. The alleged pay-to-vote scheme is a textbook example of voter bribery. A conviction carries a potential penalty of up to 5 years in prison and a fine. 52 U.S.C. Section 20511, fraudulent ballot harvesting. While Minnesota law allows for a designated agent to return absentee ballots on behalf of a voter, federal law prohibits the fraudulent solicitation, collection, and submission of ballots. If the operation involved collecting ballots from voters under false pretenses, forging signatures, or filling out ballots for voters without their consent, it would constitute fraudulent ballot harvesting. This also carries a penalty of up to 5 years in prison. 18 U.S.C. Section 371, conspiracy. This is the legal glue that would bind the entire operation together. A conspiracy charge requires proof that 2 or more people agreed to commit a crime and that at least one overt act was taken in furtherance of that conspiracy. If Omar was proven to have directed her campaign staff, like the alleged Deputy Director Ali Isigani, and outside operatives to engage in voter bribery and ballot harvesting, she could be charged with conspiracy to violate federal election laws. This charge carries a potential penalty of up to 5 years in prison. Furthermore, if the conspiracy involved defrauding the United States government, e.g., by using federal campaign funds to pay for the scheme, it could elevate the potential sentence. 18 U.S.C. Section 596, intimidation and coercion of voters. The allegations also hinted at a culture of intimidation. If the operation involved pressuring or coercing vulnerable individuals to vote a certain way or to surrender their ballots, this could constitute voter intimidation, another federal crime. In addition to the federal charges, we can also look at the potential state-level criminal charges. In addition to federal statutes, Omar and her associates would face significant charges under Minnesota state law. Minnesota has some of the strictest laws regarding election integrity in the nation. Minnesota Statute Section 211B.06, bribery, corrupt influence, and solicitation of public officers. This state law makes it a felony to directly or indirectly give, offer, or promise anything of value to another person to influence that person's vote. The alleged cash payments to Somali voters would be a clear violation of this statute, which is punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. Minnesota Statute Section 208.06, illegal voting and absentee ballot fraud. This law contains multiple provisions relevant to the alleged scheme. It makes it a felony to fraudulently apply for an absentee ballot, to knowingly make a false statement on an absentee ballot application, to vote more than once, or to illegally possess another person's ballot. The alleged ballot harvesting, where operatives collected and potentially filled out ballots for others, would fall squarely under these provisions. Penalties can include up to 5 years in prison. Minnesota Statute Section 609.41, theft by swindle. If the scheme involved the misappropriation of campaign funds to pay for the illegal votes, this could constitute theft by swindle. The use of campaign donations for illegal purposes is a form of fraud, and a conviction can carry a sentence of up to 20 years in prison, depending on the value of the stolen property. In addition to the federal and state potential changes, there are potential congressional and professional consequences. Beyond the criminal justice system, a conviction or even a formal indictment on such serious charges would trigger immediate and severe consequences within the halls of Congress. Expulsion from the House of Representatives. The U.S. Constitution grants each chamber of Congress the authority to expel a member with a 2/3 vote. While expulsion is exceedingly rare, 5 times has only happened in the House's entire history. A conviction for conspiring to subvert the democratic process and steal an election would almost certainly trigger such a vote. It would be politically untenable for both parties to allow a member found guilty of such a fundamental betrayal of public trust to remain in office. Censure and removal from committee assignments. Short of expulsion, the House could take other disciplinary actions. A vote to censure Omar, which is a formal statement of disapproval, would be highly likely. More immediately, the Democratic Caucus, or the full House, depending on the political climate, would almost certainly strip her of all her committee assignments. This would effectively neuter her legislative power and influence within Congress. Disqualification from future office. Under the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, an individual who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution, engages in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or gives aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, is disqualified from holding any future federal office. While primarily used in the context of the Civil War, and more recently in debates over the January 6 Capitol attack, a deliberate and widespread conspiracy to overthrow the will of the electorate through fraud could be argued to fall under this provision, permanently barring her from ever again holding federal office. In addition to the illegal voting operation, in recent days we have a new scandal, the Feeding Our Future fraud case. The allegations of voter fraud did not exist in a vacuum. They emerged within a broader context of significant criminal activity within the Somali American community in Minnesota, most notably the massive Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. This case, which unfolded concurrently and became a major political flashpoint in 2025, provides critical context for understanding the environment in which the voter fraud allegations were made and perceived. The Feeding Our Future scandal centered on a Minneapolis-based nonprofit that was supposed to administer the federal child nutrition program, which provided funds to feed children during the COVID-19 pandemic. Federal prosecutors alleged that the organization's founder, Amy Bach, oversaw an elaborate scheme involving over 250 fake meal sites that siphoned over $250 million in taxpayer funds. As the investigation widened, it was revealed that the total fraud across multiple state and federally funded social service programs in Minnesota could be as high as $1 billion over the last 5 years. A crucial detail linking this scandal to the political sphere was the demographic makeup of the defendants. Of the 87 people charged across the main fraud cases, all but 8 were of Somali descent, with 61 being convicted as of December 2025. This fact was heavily emphasized by political opponents of Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz, who was the state's governor during the period of the fraud. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, Republican Kentucky, accused Walz and his administration of allowing millions to be stolen and alleged they were aware of the fraud, but failed to act for fear of political retaliation. Omar herself was directly tied to the scandal through campaign donations and personal associations. She acknowledged that people involved in the fraud had donated to her campaign, but stated she returned the money years ago. A resurfaced video also showed her serving meals at Safari Restaurant, an establishment later exposed as part of the fraud scheme, where operators allegedly stole over $3.9 million on paper while receiving more than $16 million in taxpayer funds. This backdrop of a massive, proven fraud scandal involving numerous members of her own community created a climate of suspicion. The allegations of a pay-to-vote scheme, though unproven, were viewed by many through the lens of the Feeding Our Future case. The narrative became one of a pervasive culture of corruption that extended from social service fraud to the highest levels of the electoral process. As one opinion piece stated, Minnesota is now facing one of the largest documented government service fraud scandals in United States history, and it was this environment that fueled calls for investigations into Omar's political operations. The intersection of the voter fraud allegations and the Feeding Our Future scandal created a political firestorm that escalated dramatically in late 2025, with high-level federal officials getting involved. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced a new investigation on December 1, 2025, focusing on the alleged diversion of Minnesota tax dollars to terrorist organizations, specifically Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Bessent claimed that money from individuals who committed fraud had been transferred through wire organizations operating outside the regulated banking system and was being tracked to the Middle East and Somalia. He placed the blame squarely on the feckless mismanagement of the Biden administration and Governor Tim Walz. Omar vehemently pushed back against these allegations during December 7, 2025, appearance on Face the Nation. She stated, "I really don't, and I don't think the secretary himself understands what he's referring to." While calling the underlying fraud reprehensible and claiming she was among the first to call for an investigation, she denied any connection to terrorism, arguing that if such a link existed, it would be a failure of the FBI. She also condemned President Trump's rhetoric, calling his recent anti-Somali tirade completely disgusting. Meanwhile, on the state level, Republican lawmakers continued to press the case on the original voter fraud allegations. Representative Steve DRAZKOWSKI, who had filed the initial complaints against Omar in 2018, reiterated his claims, stating that new evidence clearly points to a culture of fraud, which has resulted in mountains of fraudulent ballots being cast and counted, possibly changing the outcome of several races. He called for emergency committee hearings to pause the counting and mailing of ballots to assure the public of the results' integrity. It was DRAZKOWSKI's 2018 complaint that the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, CFB, investigated and ultimately upheld, finding that Omar had broken state campaign finance laws. This prior finding, while administrative and not criminal, was used as a cornerstone to argue a pattern of unethical and illegal behavior. The story of the alleged pay-to-vote operation tied to Ilhan Omar is a complex tapestry woven from explosive claims, partisan investigations, and a separate, massive, and proven fraud scandal. The core allegations that a sitting congresswoman directed a sophisticated scheme to buy votes from her own community are profoundly serious. If proven true, they would represent a deep betrayal of democratic principles and would trigger a cascade of legal and political consequences, from lengthy prison sentences for federal and state crimes to expulsion from Congress. However, it is crucial to distinguish between allegations and proof. The claims originated from a highly partisan source with a history of controversial methods, and the specific claims of her direct involvement have never been substantiated by law enforcement or independent judicial bodies. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board did find she broke campaign finance law in a separate 2018 matter, a finding upheld after a year-long investigation. But this was an administrative violation, not a criminal charge related to voter fraud. In fact, available sources do not document a criminal indictment or state conviction of Ilhan Omar in Minnesota arising from the voter fraud stories cited by critics. In contrast, the Feeding Our Future scandal is a proven and devastating case of large-scale fraud. Federal prosecutors have secured convictions against dozens of individuals, with the total number charged reaching 87 and 61 convicted as of late 2025. The scope of the theft is staggering, with estimates reaching over $1 billion across multiple schemes. The undeniable reality of this scandal, coupled with the fact that many of its perpetrators were from the Somali American community Omar represents, and that some had donated to her campaign, which she states she returned, has created a potent and damaging political narrative. As one report noted, a question has also been raised about whether Omar knew that this fraud was occurring, or at least should have been tipped off to the fact that something was amiss, especially given connections between her former campaign officials and convicted fraudsters. This is the heart of the enduring questions. While Omar has not been charged with any crime related to the fraud cases, the sheer scale of the corruption within her political and cultural community has raised serious questions about her judgment, her oversight, and her awareness. The political fallout has been immense, with federal investigations launched by the Treasury Department to explore whether any of the stolen funds were diverted to terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab. Omar has vehemently denied these connections and pushed back against the accusations, calling them politically motivated. Yet, the perception of a culture of fraud, a term used by our critics to describe the environment, persists. Ultimately, The story of Ilhan Omar is a study in the collision of unproven, explosive allegations and a massive, proven criminal enterprise. The pay-to-vote scheme remains a serious but unsubstantiated claim that fueled partisan attacks, but failed to result in any legal action against her. The Feeding Our Future scandal, however, is a documented catastrophe that has stained her political backyard, forcing her to constantly answer for the actions of her constituents and associates. The enduring questions are not about whether the Feeding Our Future fraud happened. It did, but about the degree of proximity and responsibility. For her critics, the two are inextricably linked, creating a narrative of systemic corruption that extends from social service fraud to the ballot box. For her supporters, there are distinct issues, with one being a partisan smear and the other a criminal tragedy for which she is not personally culpable. The truth, as is often the case, may lie somewhere in the murky space between these two competing narratives, leaving her legacy and the trust in her district's electoral integrity permanently clouded by a fog of suspicion and scandal. I hope this gives you a little more information about what has been going on in the Somali community in Minneapolis and how Ilhan Omar has been involved. These are potential allegations against her, but the illegal acts are being slowly uncovered with the involvement of the federal authorities. The left is saying that these allegations are racist, but the truth is that these illegal acts really occurred and that the Somali community has taken advantage of their power and position in the Minnesota market. It is time for the public to demand accountability for these acts, and those that are involved get the appropriate punishment. The other question we need to be asking is why we let this group of immigrants into the United States in the first place, since almost 80% of them aren't contributing or integrating with American culture. To watch more videos like this about our culture and other videos to assist you in building a biblical worldview, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or to our rumble.com or youtube.com channels. Thanks for watching this video and have a great day. Are you looking for a limitless supply of insightful reads to expand your mind and transform your life? Look no further than Nehemiah Reset's ebook library, where knowledge meets inspiration at nehemiahreset.org/ebook. Go there today to discover a wealth of valuable resources to help you on your personal and professional journey to build a biblical worldview. Learn more about the Bible and how culture is impacting your worldview. Again, that the ebook library is located at nehemiahreset.org/ebook. Hope to see you soon. My name is Mark. I'm one of the spokespersons for Nehemiah Reset. The prior video was sponsored by Nehemiah Reset, a 501c3. Our mission is to assist Christians in developing a biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural and biblical issues. We seek to inform Christ's followers, equip them, and mobilize them into action to vote for their biblical values and to actively engage in our culture. We are also committed to help Christians and non-believers to develop a better biblical view. Nehemiah Reset produces videos and ebooks to assist members of the church in developing a biblical worldview when it comes to cultural issues. We produce videos on key topics like public school indoctrination, the woke agenda, sex education, equity and inclusion, climate change, immigration, religious freedom, and much, much more. To learn more about Nehemiah Reset or to watch our latest videos, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. We produce 2 to 3 videos every week. To get a weekly list of our latest videos, sign up for our weekly newsletter by going to nehemiahreset.org/email and subscribe. You can support our website by liking our videos, subscribing to our channels, or helping us reach more people through tax-exempt donations. Thanks for your help in growing God's kingdom and bringing more people to Christ. Thank you for your support and help. Come back again soon. Have a great day.